Thank you so much for staying with the Monday Report. Let's go beyond the borders and speak to Joanna LeBlanc. She's a national security law and foreign relations expert speaking to us from the United States of America. Joanna, thank you so much for your patience. Let's just get straight into this. What are your immediate reactions to President Trump's inauguration speech today?
Thank you so much, Trevor, for the opportunity to have this discussion with you and your viewers today. Here, look, we have a new president. The American people have spoken, and President Trump was officially sworn in today. I think it's a new day in American politics and American governance. Mr. Trump outlined his plans to make America an even greater nation. In his speech, he talked about immigration, which has been one of his top concerns. If anyone watched the campaign, you will see that he focused on that greatly. So he outlined his vision, and one of them is that he wants to continue with building the wall, which he started during his first term as president. And he wants to ensure that some of the cartels that help and aid migrants to come to the U.S.-Mexico border, he wants to designate them as terrorist organizations. And he wants to ensure that America strengthens some of its trade policies to ensure that America gets the best possible outcome when it comes to engaging with other nations around trade and so forth. So ultimately, I think that Mr. Trump, as the head of state, as the leader of America, is within his rights to determine what policies are necessary to ensure that he has a great 4 years and also to ensure that America maintains its global standing in the world.
Okay, Joanna, are we seeing a pivotal moment here when it comes to foreign relations? When he spoke about the Panama Canal, for example, does that concern you, that this could be a source of conflict?
Well, whether it concerns me or not, I think that's irrelevant. I think that if the United States government has information, intelligence that indicates that securing the Panama Canal serves in the national security interest of the United States government, I think that it should be explored on how to secure the Panama Canal, right? As you know, Trevor, the United States used the Panama Canal more than any other countries in the region. It uses about 60% of it. So I think that if the United States government, again, can make an argument as to why capturing and purchasing the Panama Canal is necessary, I think is something that should be explored. But obviously, it's not going to happen without a fight, because the leadership in Panama has indicated that it's not going to happen under no circumstances. And I think it's also within the rights of the government in Panama to make sure that it defend its interest as it negotiates with the United States government. And I think that the U.S. Is also going to work through the Organization of American States to lobby and to secure the Panama Canal. And in addition, I don't know if you've been watching, Trevor, there's actually legislation that's been introduced by the U.S. Congress for the acquisition of the Panama Canal.
Yeah, as a foreign relations expert yourself, should other nations brace for impact, quote unquote? Because he said that at this particular point, it's going to be simply America first.
I think that every nation should ensure that it protects its interests and the interests of its people, the interests of its borders. Now, however, how you go about to execute that, could differentiate between determining on the leader's personality in politics. But I think that America has always been about ensuring that America engage in policies that favors America, right? So I think what's important is that as other nations are negotiating with the United States government to ensure that their countries are too are being their interests are also being protected, because it's not a matter of the United States, imposing their views and their values on other states. It's about collaboration. That's what diplomacy and international relations is about. So I think that all parties involved in these negotiations need to make sure that the interests of their citizens and their people are protected at all costs.
As a legal expert yourself and also national security and foreign relations expert, there's a conversation that has been had several times when it comes to gender and human rights. Now, the head of state said that for the U.S., there are only two genders, male, female. Is that going to be a point of controversy going forward?
Absolutely. As you know, starting under Obama, the United States made significant strides in recognizing the rights of LGBTQI plus persons in this country, and obviously the rights of trans as well. It was under President Barack Obama that same-sex marriage was legalized, right? But obviously that was a policy of the Democrats, and everybody knows this. The Democrats and the Republicans differ when it comes to LGBTQI plus rights in this country. And Mr. Trump has made it very clear that there are only two genders in America. And I think for some of us, it is rather problematic, right? Because you do have folks who, maybe were born this way, right? Or maybe were, because of various reasons, they identify with various groups. But I think that Mr. Trump, one thing about Mr. Trump is that he will outline a lot of his policies, but I think that there's always room for negotiations. There's always room for some of these human rights groups to lobby the administration. And I can tell you this, Trevor, there's going to be a lot of pushback and there's going to be a lot of litigation. All right. While the president can do a lot through executive actions, but we do have a Supreme Court here in America. But one could also argue that the Supreme Court is ran by majority, those who have more of a conservative view of interpreting the U.S. Constitution. But nonetheless, there will be litigation. So a lot of his policies will not be implemented immediately because of litigation here in this country.
In your analysis of the speech, did you find some moments of hyperbole, for example, from the president's statements? For example, he spoke about the fires burning without a token of defense, and yet the Cal fire says that the Eaton fires have been 87% contained and the Palisades fire at 59%. Was that an exaggeration on the president's side?
Well, I think the president was alluding to the current state of America's economy based on his position. As you know, President Biden is leaving office with an approval rate of roughly 39%. That is incredibly low. I think that there were a lot of challenges that impact the presidency of former President Joe Biden. One is that he was elected by the American people during unprecedented times. I mean, Trevor, there was a global health pandemic where millions and millions of Americans lost their lives, and the global economy had collapsed, and Joe Biden and his administration had to build on that, and it wasn't a small feat. It took a lot of work, but ultimately, while Joe Biden had made some strides, but obviously he fell short in different areas. And I think also too, Mr. Trump was talking to the fact that the assassination attempts against him, and also the various court cases against him, and he feel as though, and many Americans feel this way, that it was a witch hunt, and we saw recently he was sentenced by the judge in New York, who essentially sentenced him to what you call an unconditional discharge, which means that obviously Mr. Trump was not incarcerated, nor his movements were restricted, nor was imposed any sort of fines. So I think he's referring to the challenges that he endured to get to where he is, as well as the current state that Mr. Biden is leaving American economy in, according to him and his perception.
Will the Trump presidency claw back on the fight against climate change?
Absolutely. Mr. Trump made it very clear that one of his first actions is that he's going to withdraw from the Paris climate agreement. Mr. Trump, in general, does not believe in multilateralism. And the reason being is because he thinks that America spends entirely too much money through these multilateral organizations, whereas other countries are not paying their share. We also saw that Mr. Trump withdrew from the World Health Organizations, and I expect Mr. Trump to possibly take similar stance this term. So certainly he is going to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord for a variety of reasons, and one of them being that he does not believe other countries pay their fair share.
In terms of the security law that you are an expert in, declaring a national emergency at the southern border, what kind of impact would that have?
Well, one of the implications of that is that now the U.S. government can have a military presence at the U.S.-Mexico border. And there are certain actions that the U.S. government can take that under normal circumstances, the United States would have to go through a different channel, perhaps through the legal route, to ensure that those actions could be implemented. But because of a national emergency, the U.S. government could essentially close the border completely. But the challenge with that is, Trevor, is that under international law, which the United States is a party to many of these treaties, is that when you have a situation where folks are seeking for protection because of persecution in their homeland, they are allowed under international law to come to one of the point of entries in the United States and ask for asylum, and then go through the appropriate process for the U.S. to determine is there a real cause for this person to be paroled into the United States. But by invoking emergency orders, such as what Mr. Trump announced, such right will no longer exist. Unfortunately, at least not claiming asylum through one of the United States points of entry.
Do you foresee a situation where the new administration is going to face quite a number of legal hurdles? Will there be a pushback from the courts on this foreign issue policies that is declared even now? Certainly.
We're going to see a lot of legal actions at the state and certainly at the federal level. And in addition to the litigation, Trevor, you're going to see human rights groups that are going to protest, that are going to challenge Mr. Trump, right? Because while immigration is indeed a concern in this country, and Biden acknowledged it, but at the same token, there are international laws and also there are domestic laws that the United States has agreed to that must be upheld, that must be protected. But at the same token, the U.S. Borders must also be protected, right? To ensure that those who are coming into the United States actually are fleeing from persecution and are not merely economic migrants, because there have been instances where some of these migrants are seeking for better jobs and better education, just better opportunities in general. But unfortunately, the United States does not have a law, and no other country in the United States have a law to accommodate those people other than coming through the other channels, such as being sponsored by a family member, getting a H-1B visa through your employer. So those various channels, but it is not lawful to come to the U.S.-Mexico border to secure asylum when all you are looking for is better economic opportunity. And I think many countries around the world don't have such policy in place.
When he was the 45th president, there was quite a number of incidences, quote unquote, that happened in terms of immigrants and racism. Are we going to see a situation where this is going to boil to the surface again? Because it's been an underlying situation that people talk about in hushed tones. Sometimes it surfaces, sometimes it doesn't. Is this most likely going to boil to the surface again?
Absolutely. You see the tension that exists here in this country. For example, there are what you call sanctuary cities here in America. And what those sanctuary cities are essentially cities that says, we are not going to give you up to the federal government if you don't have proper documentation, right? So those cities are essentially safe cities for migrants to live and to work in. And Mr. Trump has indicated that he's going to take a close look at those cities and have a mass deportation on day one. In fact, starting as early as tomorrow. But I think that as we're talking about immigration in this country, while it is important to ensure that we have immigration policies that are consistent with the rule of law in our U.S. Constitution, but immigration must be dealt with from a place of empathy and also compassion, right? I think that it is dangerous to put everybody in one box, right? Because there are different categories of immigrants here in this country, right? And some of the policies that I think that are going to be implemented will put a lot of people at harm's way, and that is a fact. It will put African Americans at harm's way. Some of these policies we're talking about are policies that if the government suspects that you might be an immigrant, they could target you and ask you for documentation. I mean, all of us could look like an immigrant, right? Anybody, if you're African American, anybody could be targeted. So I think some of those laws are problematic, but I do think that ultimately there will be pushback from the different interest groups, and there will be litigation to address some of these concerns.
As we wind up on this, Joanna, what will Trump's return mean to the global wars that we are seeing in different places?
Well, I think that we've already seen the impact of Trump's presidency when it comes to the Israel and Gaza conflict. Netanyahu announced a ceasefire deal days before Trump was sworn in, something that Mr. Biden had been trying to secure for the past 2 years or more and could not necessarily achieve. While I think that Mr. Biden is owed some kind of credit, but I think ultimately Mr. Trump was the one who really negotiated that deal with Netanyahu, and it is a deal that was long overdue. But I think too, in the situation of Ukraine and Russia, Mr. Trump has made it very clear also that the American taxpayers are spending entirely too much money to support this conflict, and he vows to end this conflict. And I think that so we're going to see some conversations with President Zelensky and Putin about the conflict. And I think that we expect to see some kind of resolution as well. So I think that Mr. Trump is a non-interventionist, which means that he would not intervene in some of these wars and some of these conflicts that exist outside of America. And he's kind of like, hands-off approach, allowing other nations to determine their own self-determination.
All right. And finally, I see the BBC reporting here that in the last few hours, there have been members of the far-right Proud Boys group parading around the streets of Washington, where you are. They were seen wearing their signature black and yellow shirts. Is that going to be a problem going forward, especially the fact that they took part in the raids?
Sure. I think one of the things that I think we must acknowledge is that different groups of people supported Mr. Trump, right? Of course, you have the Proud Boys because they believe Mr. Trump's policies are more consistent with the things that they care about. But you have conservatives, you have folks who are Democrats who voted for Mr. Trump because of different reasons. Maybe it's because, they believe his trade policies will be better for the United States. They believe Mr. Trump will bring a stronger economy to them and their families, right? Because Americans are focused a lot on the cost of groceries, right? The cost of, access to housing, which is incredibly high here in this country. I mean, you have people, Trevor, who are working 2-3 jobs, who still cannot make ends meet, who still cannot rent a decent place to live, because the cost of living in this country has increased tremendously, not to mention, obviously, inflation. But in the context of Proud Boys, obviously, some have indicated that it is a racist group of folks, but I'm sure that there are different categories of people who make up the Proud Boys. And I think that we're going to see more and more of that throughout Mr. Trump's administration. And as you know, today as well, there are folks who are protesting, because it's Martin Luther King Day, and it is a day that we honor. And many of us honor the legacy of MLK and his contribution to American society and his contribution to fighting to making America a more just and a more equitable place where all of us, regardless of where you're from, could truly pursue life, liberty, and happiness, and also could be treated based on your character, not the content not the color of your skin.
All right. Thanks, Joanna. Joanna LeBlanc, there, national security law and foreign relations expert, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Thank you for making time. We'll see how the Trump rule turns out over the period. All right? Now, that's where we leave it for now. Thank you so much for watching the Monday Report. My name is Trevor Mbija.